and what policies, investments, and resources can be brought to the table to support that. And I think similarly, I think a founding principle for this work is that this is also going to require solutions at every level of communities working together, of state policies, but also federal policies and federal investments, so that there's work to be done no matter what area you work in, and what level you also work in. Next slide. So there's just a little bit of a history of how Thrive from the Start came into being. Thanks to funding and resources from the Pritzker Children's Initiative, Housing Is, Prevent Child Abuse in America, Schoolhouse Connection, and Zero to Three came together to really do three things. One, develop a shared policy agenda. Two, raise awareness and recruit champions. And three, plan for more sustained work. And what you're seeing today in the rest of today's presentation is really what that what that more sustained work looks like, and what Thrive from the Start can be to make that happen. Next slide. Uh, I'll just touch on, I mentioned the policy agenda. My colleague TJ from Schoolhouse Connection will talk about that in more detail. But I just wanted to highlight, and I think you'll definitely see this. Again, I think that policy agenda reflects the idea that we need to be thinking about this from the perspective of housing, homelessness services, early childhood services, healthcare, data and research, and also how do we connect across those as well. Next slide. So this is just a brief overview of the structure that we've put together from Thrive from the Start. So in addition to a steering committee, and here you can see the membership of the steering committee, we have four work groups: federal policy, communications, data and research, state policy, and each of those work groups is facilitated by one of those original four organizations. And you'll hear more later on about what you can do and how you can participate. Next slide. And this is just a list of a few of the organizations that have started to come together to partner around this work. And part of our goal is to build the list of organizations, but also really figure out how we can work together in new and deeper ways. And with that, I will hand it off.
Thanks so much, David. Before we turn it over to Catherine, and Corey, I just want to say how exciting it is to hear about all the different organizations that are involved. And for those of you, we have a huge turnout today, which is great. We had close to 700 organizations decide they wanted to join us today. So it's obvious that there's a lot of people in lots of different realms of the work we do that want to get involved. So excited to hear about that. And I think now we'll hear from Catherine and Corey to help us understand better a little bit about what the science is telling us.
Great. Thanks for having me and for having the Center on the Developing Child. I'm thrilled to see such interest in the topic. And Allison, that's just a huge number of folks who are interested in this and want to learn more. So let me go ahead and jump in. Next slide, please. So in children beginning well before birth, development is shaped by the full range of the experiences and exposures that are embedded in the places they live. And actually, I should say, I'm going to give a little bit, Catherine and I are going to give a little bit of the science, the kind of what the science says about this topic. So that's where I'm starting. So beginning well before birth, development is shaped by this full range of the experiences and exposures that are embedded in the places where children live. And this includes their social environments, but also their built and natural environments. So altogether, we can call this the developmental environment. And during early childhood, biological systems are constantly reading the environment, and they develop in response to the experiences and the exposures that they read. And these experiences and exposures can have positive or negative effects. So positive exposures in the developmental environment, they fuel healthy development. And those are things like clean air and consistent caregiving. And negative exposures can derail healthy development. That's like exposure to lead or poor air quality. And I want to note, relationships remain critically important to development. Like our developing brains are wired to need that responsive back and forth interaction with adult caregivers to develop healthy brain architecture. Full stop. Like relationships remain critically important and essential to development. And We need to expand the narrative about what influences healthy childhood development to include the role of the built-in natural environment in shaping development. Next slide, please. So when it comes to the effects of experiences and exposures that children have in their developmental environment, timing really matters. We are all sensitive and responsive to our environments, but development is a process that evolves in a way that makes certain age ranges especially sensitive to environments. And so what this means is that children's experiences and exposures during the early years are very powerful in influencing children's health now, but importantly later in their lives as much older adults. And sensitivity during the prenatal period is greater than young children. Young children are more sensitive than adolescents. Adolescents are more sensitive than many adults. And this differential sensitivity means there's good news and bad news when it comes to children and exposures. Because anything we do to protect expectant parents and infants early, when biological systems are most sensitive, is likely to have an outside positive effect on all the outcomes that we care about across mental and physical health across the life course. But the converse is also true. When we don't protect children during the prenatal period and early childhood years, we're likely to see an outsized negative effect on their health across the lifespan. So developmental science is telling us it's not just what we do and whether we do it, but when we step in to support children. That's really important. And every environment is infused with a combination of positive and negative influences on health and development, but the level of exposures to hazards and access to opportunity are not distributed equally. The qualities of the conditions in which people live are shaped and deeply rooted in public policies and social history. Next slide, please. So now specifically looking at housing. Housing instability affects health and development beginning in the earliest days of life. For example, this can be through greater likelihood for preterm delivery, lower birth weight. In the early years, it can be higher rates of respiratory infections or fever and allergies, developmental delays. It can be later mental health problems or lower educational attainment. There are many underlying biological pathways, including increased stress for children and caregivers, that explain this connection between housing instability and the effects on early childhood development. And we at the center are going to have lots more pieces and coming out in the next couple of months that are going to explain that in a lot more detail. So stay tuned. There's more coming that'll kind of explain it at that biological level. But what I want to emphasize as I transition it now to Catherine is that as we start to recognize elements like housing as part of this developmental environment, once we do that, we can begin to make different choices. And we can redesign the environments where children live, learn, and play, thus altering those experiences and exposures they have and helping to support positive development and outcomes. All right, well, thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to Catherine.
Thanks, Corey. And really to help us make better and different choices, and because each of us here are public health champions, we first need to understand the scope of the problem. And so our partners at Schoolhouse Connections and the Poverty Solution Center at University of Michigan work to estimate the prevalence of homelessness among infants and toddlers. And they found in the 2022 and 2023 program year that approximately 450,000 infants and toddlers, and so those are kids between the ages of 0 to 3, experience homelessness in the United States, and nearly 70,000 babies were born to parents experiencing homelessness during pregnancy. And so they also found, as a kind of another data fact from their report, and I know Nina is putting it in the chat, that homelessness among infants and toddlers increased in a majority of states, DC and Puerto Rico, from 2021 to 2023. These are conservative estimates, but highlight the need for us to address this issue head on and to enact systems level change across sectors. By working with those directly with lived experiences through policies, programs, investments, and other approaches, we can change the environments that Corey was just talking about to support children and families before they're in crisis. Next slide, please. And we know that when children and families have safe, stable environments, they have the foundations for healthy births, development, and overall well-being. But often families experiencing homelessness are referred to the child welfare and or criminal justice systems or other kind of downstream systems. But we know that homelessness is not a form of child abuse and neglect, nor is it a bad parenting problem. It's a symptom of lack of supports for families. And so we have come together and we need to address the root causes of homelessness so that children and families can thrive. Next slide, please. And so addressing and preventing expectant parent, infant, and toddler homelessness requires immediate support as well as long-term solutions. Additionally, parents in need of support must feel safe to reach out and accept said support. And this is really where relationship building and partnerships are key, as David mentioned, at the local, state, and national levels. And so together, our collaborative policy agenda outlines changes we're calling for to advance research-informed solutions. And we also want to make sure that this policy agenda is actionable for practitioners, advocates across the US, and again, kind of across the different levels. And so I will pass it back to Allison and TJ to talk more about our policy agenda.
Thank you both so much. I think the data is so clear and convincing, so I appreciate you both taking the time. And Corey mentioned housing as part of the developmental environment, and I think that makes so much sense when you say it, but it's not really how we do a lot of our work when we think about how we're not meeting the mark for those 450,000 infants and toddlers who are experiencing homelessness in the US. So we know a little bit now about who Thrive from the Start is and why our work is so important, but what can we do about it? So next, let's hear from TJ on our federal policy agenda.
Thanks so much, Allison. And hello, everyone. I'm excited to share a little bit more about this agenda. Our policy agenda reflects how deeply we all believe that cross-sector partnerships are essential to solving infant and toddler homelessness. We actually created this last year as a guide for our collective work to elevate the unique needs of PN3 families experiencing homelessness across federal policies, appropriations, and administrative actions. Through the Federal Policy Working Group, we are identifying specific and targeted strategies to educate policymakers and influence policy decisions. For example, last month, our group issued a statement thanking Congress for working in a bipartisan way to continue, and in some cases, increase funding for many of the federal programs that serve infants, toddlers, young children, and their families experiencing homelessness, while also calling on Congress to build on those bipartisan investments. And right now, our group, we are currently drafting appropriations requests and report language for policymakers to consider as they begin the work on FY27. We've also identified specific recommendations for legislative vehicles and will continue pulling the expertise and networks within the group to shape, defend, and strengthen policies impacting PN3 families experiencing homelessness. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the housing policies. A key pillar of our housing policy work is ensuring that every young child and family experiencing homelessness has access to all federal homeless services. That starts by aligning federal programs around a shared understanding that any child or family without a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence is experiencing homelessness, full stop. Right now, roughly 80% of children and families identified as homeless by federal programs like Head Start and the Child Care and Development Fund do not meet the threshold for HUD homeless assistance programs. That disconnect leaves many young children and their families without access to housing resources. We also support housing policies that both directly and indirectly support PN3 families who are experiencing homelessness and the families who are at risk of experiencing homelessness, including ensuring emergency and transitional service. Transitional shelters include developmentally appropriate settings and services for infants and toddlers, increasing the supply of affordable housing, supporting stronger cross-collaboration between housing and early childhood systems, and preventing evictions and supporting families during and immediately following those evictions. On the next slide, we'll talk about the early childhood and PN3 policies that strengthen the systems and better support families experiencing homelessness through prioritization and stronger coordination across programs. Many federal early childhood programs, including Early Head Start, Child Care, and Early Intervention, already include requirements to identify and prioritize families experiencing homelessness. But too often, those provisions are unevenly implemented and families continue to face barriers accessing those services. Improving coordination, implementation, and guidance across these programs is an important focus for the Federal Policy Working Group. We are particularly interested in strategies that will ensure families experiencing homelessness are identified and prioritized, reduce administrative barriers to accessing services, and improve coordination among PN3 systems so families can more easily access the supports they need. On the next slide, our health policies focus is another critical pillar of this work because homelessness during pregnancy and the first 3 years of life can have profound impacts on both maternal and child health. When families are experiencing homelessness or moving frequently, they often lose access to a consistent medical home and face barriers to prenatal care, developmental screenings, and ongoing health services. Our health policy work focuses on strengthening connections between health systems, housing systems, and early childhood programs so families can access the care and supports that they need. These policies include ensuring families experiencing homelessness have access to consistent medical, home, and coordinated community-based care, expand coverage so that expectant parents and families with young children don't lose coverage during these periods of housing instability, and engaging insurers and systems to better understand and respond to the needs of expectant parents and families with infants and toddlers experiencing housing instability. On the next slide, we highlight some of the data and research policies. Data is a foundational issue across all of this work. Families with infant and toddlers experiencing homelessness are often invisible in many federal data systems, either because most are staying temporarily with others or in hotels and therefore do not meet the narrower definitions used by some programs, or because federal systems do not make the data that is already collected available to the public. For example, data on infants and toddlers experiencing homelessness is collected and reported by states to the Office of Child Care, but not reported publicly. Similarly, HUD collects data by age on children who stay in HUD-funded shelters, but does not make that data available. When families are missing from public data, they are also missing from policy decisions, funding formulas, and program planning. Our data policy priorities focus on ensuring policymakers have a more accurate picture of the scope and needs of PN3 homelessness. That includes promoting a consistent federal definition of homelessness grounded in the broader definition used by federal early childhood programs, improving data collection and reporting across federal systems, including housing, early childhood, and health programs, encouraging disaggregation of data by age and family status so infants and toddlers are visible in homelessness data, and increasing transparency and availability of relevant data, such as homelessness data collected through the child care systems and other early childhood programs. Better data allows policymakers and communities to better target resources, identify service gaps, and measure progress in addressing infant and toddler homelessness. Thanks so much, and I'll turn it back over to Allison now.
Thanks, TJ. So much. So much can be and needs to be done at the federal level. When I dive into sort of the definitions there, it really in the data it really is astounding. And we also know that so much starts at the state level, and state activity can really push a movement as well. So we'll be hearing from Katrina in a moment, but I just want to address a couple quick questions I've seen in the chat. You'll hear us say terms. If you don't understand them, please ask us because we can answer that in the chat and make sure that you can get the most from the presentations. PN3, we say a lot, and we mean the prenatal to 3 population. So from before birth to the age of 3. And the slides will be available on the Thrive from the Start website after the call. So please, as questions come up, put them in the chat box. But now let's welcome Katrina to talk about some of our state work support.
Thanks, Allison. Next slide to get started. So in an effort to support states in moving the Thrive from the Start policy agenda forward at that level, we were able to offer a funding and technical assistance opportunity to statewide teams in the fall of 2025. Over 40 states applied, and we went through an extensive review and interview period with them, eventually awarding 10 state teams in December of 2025 with a launch of work in January of 2026. And I see many members of those teams here in the chat. in fact. In addition to that funding, the capacity building activities that are on the next slide include access to an online community of practice that includes topic-specific calls and an online platform with discussion boards and resources for those state teams. Additionally, we are planning an in-person event this May that will bring all of those states together to collaborate and learn from each other. And finally, each state receives individualized technical assistance supports facilitated by a 0 to 3 technical assistance lead and supported by a TA bench that's currently made up of 11 national partner organizations. You can see the states that received awards on this next slide. We really tried to spread the work across the country and across a diverse group of states. So you will see Arkansas, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Georgia, Mississippi, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and West Virginia highlighted on this map. Those states successfully submitted a letter of interest and completed a 90-minute interview. Both parts of the application process were scored by a team of 8 reviewers. Next slide. And so what was interesting about all the states that applied was that needs were not vastly different between those states that we funded and those that we did not. And I'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide. There was, however, some differences in the strengths of the teams that applied. The teams that we ultimately ended up funding really had strong cross-sector representation from not only housing, but from early childhood and health sectors as well. They showed a deep commitment to engaging families with lived experience at the decision-making tables, and their teams really demonstrated a strong readiness to begin the work in January. So next slide. Finally, as we've begun to engage with these teams, we are seeing some common themes across their technical assistance requests, among other things, and I won't read all of these to you, but they want to connect to and learn from other states, and we heard that really loudly in the interviews as well. They want information about messaging in different states, both to legislators and to partners. That's a high priority for them. Data, as Allison and TJ both mentioned, is an ongoing discussion and challenge. And along with that, many states are working through what they need and how they will get it for a landscape analysis. And I'll leave that there for a minute for you guys to look at. And then I'll hand it back to Allison.
Thanks so much, Katrina. It's really exciting. And I can't wait to see all the work that'll happen in the states over the next year and more. We've heard some amazing info today about Thrive from the Start, why we're here, the work that we're doing, but we really also want to spend some time focused on all of you who may be new to Thrive from the Start and figuring out how you can get involved and join with us. So we're going to turn it over to Abra.
Thanks so much, Allison. Yeah, so I think like Allison just said, we've really heard a lot of things. I'm seeing some exciting discussion happening in the chat. So really the question is, okay, great. Either you are hearing information for the first time and it's new to you and that's wonderful, or you've been deeply steeped in this work. But what can you do? So next slide, please. We have something that we call champions. And this is a way for organizations that are ready to say, this work is critical, this work is important. We believe that it is unacceptable that there are almost 500,000 infants and toddlers in the United States that are experiencing homelessness alongside their families and caregivers. So we are hoping to continue to grow and broaden the list of organizations that are standing up and saying, we are champions, we support this. You can see on the slide a bit more about how we're defining that. In a moment, I will show you where you can sign up to be a champion. But in short, we see that there is power in having the collective action of all of your organizations. And for folks who are not able to join us today and watch the recording later, to again really say, and take a stand that this work is important and meaningful. So that is one major way that your organization can become involved in this work. Going down the line, we will have opportunities for champions to have their work from their organizations elevated in, for example, the Thrive from the Start newsletter, at future convenings that we hold. And then as we continue with other actions through the working groups, which I'll talk a little bit more about as well, that's another opportunity to really be a leader in moving this effort forward. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a little bit more about what I was saying in terms of what
Hey,
champions.
Doug. Good. How are you?
Oh, and I think we're just going to go ahead and mute. Okay, perfect. So champions can, you can see here, these are different ways that they can become involved in the work and really help push it forward. And then we see that there are additional benefits. Anyone can be a part of this network. And again, I'll be talking in just a minute about the working groups, which is another level of engagement, but champions will have a particular sort of status. There's a place on our website that we do list those as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a screenshot from the Thrive from the Start website. And maybe, Lena, if you're able to drop, thank you so much, ahead of me already, drop that link into the chat. So that's thrivefromthestart.org. And you'll see this banner at the top. And these are the different ways that you can access these opportunities. So for champion, you of course would click on join us as a champion. Thank you, Annalise. If you are not ready to commit to that, or you are not the person at your organization who makes those kinds of decisions, then the next option is to stay informed, which you can see right next to it. This gets you on the Thrive from the Start listserv. We do not send a ton of emails. We are not spamming your inbox, but you will get our every other month newsletter, and then any standalone action alerts or announcements that we send out. For example, when we announced the state grantees at the end of 2025, that went out to the listserv. When we put out the policy statement that TJ referenced, that went out to the listserv. So it's really the most salient information that we don't think that you would necessarily be getting from anywhere else. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that last one right there is joining the working group. And I think if we go to the next slide. Yeah, so you can see here that we have started to arrange our work this year in 4 different working groups. We have the Federal Policy Working Group, which TJ heads up, the Communications Working Group, which I head up, Data and Research, which Catherine leads, and then State Policy, which is led by Katrina, who you heard from, as well as her colleague Jamie, who was not speaking today. So we really see these as the 4 core groups that Thrive from the Start is centering the work around. There are absolutely people who join more than one working group. We welcome that. We encourage that. Different working groups do have different levels of involvement. So absolutely, if all you can commit to at this time is to really join and get those updates, then we appreciate that and we welcome that. But we certainly hope that there are folks who are also interested in taking more of a leadership role, and the different working groups have various opportunities to be involved in that. They each have a different meeting time, but we're working to get those to be regular. So if when you're on that website and you click join a working group, it takes you to a page that shows you the contact information for the leads for the working groups. And that's who you would reach out to say, hey, when is this working group meeting? I want to join. I want to learn more. We also very, very much encourage you to share this with your colleagues. So if you say, hey, I want to join the Data and Research Working Group, but I know my colleague would be super great for comms, feel free to forward and share widely. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so I think with that, I'm going to be turning it back to either Allison or Lena, who will be, I think, taking some of the questions from the chat as well as opening it up.
Thanks so much, Abra. It's really exciting to see our table growing and with so much interest about today continuing to grow. So thank you for that. So before we turn it over to the Q&A section, I'm going to launch a poll now just to try to figure out how we can best support your work on housing instability and homelessness among our youngest kids. So I encourage you to pop in your answers there. And if you have other questions, please continue to put them into the chat box. For our presenters, if you want to come off of mute and get your video back on, I'll start to go through some of the questions we've heard. One of them is, many housing solutions require federal action, yet we're seeing efforts to reduce HUD funding. From your perspective, what can advocates, social workers, and housing providers do to protect and expand federal housing investments while continuing to address immediate housing needs? I'm going to start with TJ, but and then TJ, others might want to jump in, but I think you're our federal guy here.
That sounds great. And thank you so much for that question. Really, really thoughtful. And we agree that now is not the time to be taking away funding for HUD or any of the housing services programs. That is exactly the type of work that we are doing in the Federal Policy Working Group to raise awareness about the programs that are important to our families and to help educate and advocate for the continuation of that funding. We released a statement on the FY26, which I will try and find and link here, budget, but we're making plans actively in the Federal Policy Working Group to support greater bipartisan investments in FY27. So would really encourage anyone who is interested in getting involved in that to sign up and join as a champion.
And I'll just add that I think also there are absolutely opportunities that we'll be pushing out to. So if you're not on that listserv, make sure you get on to say, hey, sign on to this to say you support, X legislation or Y funding efforts. I think also really thinking about changes that you might be able to make in your community with your organization that don't require funding increases or congressional approval. So I don't know, I haven't had a chance to try to scroll through all the questions here, so I might be pre-answering some others, but I think really thinking through changes you could make, for example, if you're an early childhood provider, to your intake form, to think about how are you defining homelessness, and are you doing that for your clients versus having them sort of have to sort through that on their own. I think there's also really great work that's happening at the state level. We're seeing some good examples that are coming through on creative ways that states are shifting around funding to support housing if they anticipate that they won't have that federally. So just another plug to stay involved and stay connected, but I think also be thinking about ways you can work with, and if you don't have a partnership, for example, with your local public housing authority, reach out, send an email, set up a meeting. There are things that can be done to potentially prioritize these families.
And I'll just add, and I know I already said this earlier, but I think this question just underlines why Thrive from the Start is so committed to working simultaneously at the federal, state, community, and local level. Because we know that so much of these solutions happen at the local level, but the federal policies and federal resources also greatly impact what can be done and what are the challenges being faced. So just want to underline that really as a core principle of the work. And you also see that in the structure of the work groups.
Thank you all so much. Was someone going to speak up?
Yeah, I was just also going to add, I would also encourage folks, and certainly I think our partnership can support this, but reaching out to your, representatives, both at the state and federal level, is always an option too, to just put this on their radar. And so if there are different action alerts, or just connecting to reps is always important too.
Great. Thank you all so much. One more. 0 to 3 in the Schoolhouse Connection data includes 3-year-olds. There's been discussion about what range to use, particularly 0 to 2, inclusive of 2s, which is closer to the definition of infants and toddlers by 0 to 3. Do we need to develop an agreed upon standard? Can someone discuss this a little bit?
I actually like to call on SHC's senior research scientist, Sarah Shaw, if she's on and can provide a little bit more context about the report and data.
Thank you, TJ. I am on. Here I am. Sorry about that. Yes, I think it's an important question and one that we need to be thinking about in terms of making sure that we're clear on what data are available. I will share the next iteration of the Schoolhouse Connection report will have age breakdowns by year. So we'll have age breakdowns for 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4, which I think will be helpful in thinking through some of that. But certainly as we're continuing to expand research, I know Catherine, who's on the call too, we've talked a little bit about this in the research and data committee and making sure that we're having clear definitions in anything that we're doing.
Thanks so much, Sarah. We love a special guest appearance, so appreciate that answer. Another question, and Katrina, this might be directly for you. What type of agencies do the state partners represent? How does this connect to organizations such as the National Alliance on Homelessness? Actually, that might be a second question. So what type of agencies do the state partners represent?
Yeah, the teams are all different, but there are a few common things that we're seeing. Definitely public-private teams, so departments of health, early learning departments, advocates, housing organizations, families with lived experience. In some cases, they're folks who run large childcare programs, even in the state. So different in every state, but those are some common ones.
Great. Another question, Abra, this might be for you, but please bring in others. How does one become a housing provider for prenatal to 3 families?
Yeah, I saw that. I'd be curious, maybe if that person can very briefly unmute or write in the chat what if you are with an organization now, or if you're perhaps a community member or someone with lived experience, just so I have a little bit more context. But typically there's several different avenues. Some housing providers are nonprofit organizations. Some of them are public housing authorities, which I mentioned before. Those are agencies that receive their funding from HUD. And then there's within sort of the continuum of care, which is what we call shelter through to permanent housing, all those different housing supports. There's a lot of different funding mechanisms. Some can be privately funded, some through grants, some use something called the low-income housing tax credit and work with developers to create nonprofit housing. There's also work through the state housing finance agencies. That's where LIHTC, that's the low-income housing tax credit acronym, that's where that funding gets funneled through. So there's a lot of different ways. And of course, we have shelters, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, housing vouchers versus public housing. Within housing vouchers, there's lots of different types of vouchers. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but I'm also a little more context I think would be helpful. And I don't know if this is the right Christy Johnson in the chat, but it might be a colleague who is at the King County Housing Authority. So that's an additional source of information as well.
Yeah. And one thing I just wanted to tack on also in response to, I think, some of the things I've seen in the um, chat. I think while Thrive from the Start does have a policy agenda of things that that have been identified as recommendations where we think we can, there's an opportunity to make a difference. I would say that Thrive from the Start starts with the position that we don't have all of the answers and that this is also an opportunity to learn, innovate, share. And so I think one of the things that we're really hoping that Thrive from the Start can be a vehicle for is for that shared learning, for that shared sharing of innovations, and really drawing on all the wonderful minds who are on this call and others that, hopefully will join us.
Great. And David, I think that leads to another question here, which is my organization focuses on early childhood, not at all on homelessness or housing, but we're interested in the intersections. Is it still appropriate for me to join? And how do I get involved?
Yes, yes, and yes, right. I think we are. I mean, I think that goal is one of our real goals is around those intersections. And so, I think again, it's to be able to sort of sign up as a champion, but also sort of think about the work groups. If there's activities that are happening in your state that we're able to connect with you, that I think that's also, a wonderful opportunity. But yes, I think part of we're really trying to find a place for everyone who's interested in this issue, no matter where you sit. And, I think there's a lot that a lot of opportunities of working directly with folks in the early childhood sector that we really want to draw on.
Okay, can you talk a bit about engaging child welfare and where you see that sector fitting in? There are prevention and voucher resources that might be resources for some communities, and certainly Thrive resources can be valuable for child welfare partners to support young children and families. I don't know if Catherine wants to start there or who wants to jump in.
I'm happy to start with that. I do think this has been an ongoing conversation the core team has had, and I think to David's point, it's something we're looking for as we continue to expand. Of course, and I know kind of from the PCA America side, we're really thinking about those primary prevention and really those longer term solutions. But we know, again, as I kind of mentioned earlier, it's really focused on the needs as well. And so, um, yeah, I think there's a lot of engagement with the child welfare space, and actually at the next research and data work group meeting, we're having some of our colleagues from Chapin Hall to talk more about that. I would encourage, and I can find some information, but throwing some of their resources in the chat as well. They do a lot of amazing work at that cross sector of homelessness, housing insecurity, and child welfare. And I don't know, Abra or others, if there's some thoughts or additions you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think we know that child welfare involvement often happens when families are experiencing homelessness. So there's a very clear through line. There are, I mentioned briefly that there are vouchers for specific populations. There are a small number of vouchers in the United States called FUP vouchers, Family Unification Program, that can be specifically used for families that are interacting with the child welfare system simply because they don't have housing stability. But I think, again, it's not a huge number. We're just talking a couple thousand. And we really could be doing more to support that. But I think we feel that that is a very necessary piece of this cross-sector work.
Thank you so much. So many of these questions can't be just answered really quickly, but appreciate the panel addressing some of them and thinking about other resources to share. I've seen some chat about this in the some replies in chat in the chat box, but how can a school district help with this cause?
I think we had some back and forth in the chat, but Barbara, do you want to, not to put you on the spot, I'm happy to say more.
Hi there, another surprise guest guest appearance. So I put a link in the chat. School district homeless liaisons, for those of you who are from different sectors, are required to be designated under federal law, and there are responsibilities specifically for young children. Often those are limited to preschool administered programs, but they also do extend to making referrals to for example, Head Start and Early Head Start. We do know, in fact, the federal government actually collects data on 0 to 2-year-olds who are served by school districts through the McKinney-Vento program. So there's lots of resources, but really it's partnerships, doing training, raising awareness with the early childhood community, and advocating for those housing and homeless assistance solutions as well.
Thanks, Barbara. All right. What type of support is available to help organizations who are new to this intersection of housing and early childhood?
Yeah, so there's some great resources on the website. If you haven't visited, again, it's thrivefromthestart.org. But we are also working through a combination of the working groups to get out some one-pagers or other infographics to share with you all and for you all to share with your colleagues and networks. But I think that that will really be some good grounding for folks who are newer in this space or to this work. There is additionally a resources section on the website that we're continuing to fill out, but each of our individual organizations also have some useful resources. I'll, in a moment, drop a link into the chat that's focused on how to start and sustain successful partnerships. It's an interactive publication that is focused on housing and education, but I think the main lessons there are universal across all types of partnerships. But I would say, and Lena's just gone ahead and put it in the chat again, so folks don't have to scroll, but the website is an absolutely wonderful place to start.
This may be follow-up to you as well, Arbor, but what does it really mean to be a champion, and what's my organization really committing to?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the short answer is it doesn't have to be a lot. I think we see immense value in being able, if your organization, and we know some organizations do have restrictions around this, but for organizations that are able, for us to have that on our website and in other, materials that maybe make sense to use, the power of saying X number of organizations champion this work, whether we're in meetings on the Hill or we're talking to other organizations. I think that alone is very, very useful, and that's something that we've talked about throughout the lifetime of this work over the last couple of years. So at its base, you are saying we think that this is important. From there, we of course have many opportunities for you to be more involved, but I think this really is truly a place where if you're able to stand behind that notion and put your stamp out there, that is the basis level, and we won't necessarily bother you for anything beyond that. I don't know if others want to weigh in. We had a lot of discussions back and forth about champions and what it means.
I think the only thing I would add is, again, we really do see this as a collective effort. So if you think if you have other suggestions or other ways that you think that your organization could lend its weight, support this effort, please reach out and tell us that, right? So I think we're really, wanting to learn and hear from all of you additional ways that we can come together to bring about this shared goal, right? So I think our orientation is really around the shared goal, but if you have other ways that you and your organization can lean in, please tell us.
Thank you all so much for an amazing conversation and great answers. I think we got through most of the questions, if not all of them. If there are others, we will be looking through the chat and make sure that we answer them in follow-up calls, or we can reach out directly. I'm going to launch a quick poll right now so that people can answer sort of how satisfied they were with all that. But yes, but there is a place. The third question is really around what else we can do for you. So if there's specific needs you have, specific questions you have, please take the time to fill that in. We're happy to reach out. A reminder that the slides will be available on our website, and we ask you to sign up for our newsletter, become a champion, think about new ways that you can become involved with us. And again, thank you so much to all of our presenters for their fabulous information, and really look forward to working more closely with all of you. Thank you.